we'll have that opportunity to talk, and I think it'll be really beneficial for several of you. And I'll also be able to tell you exactly what your grade will be, because I will be updating grades this weekend, and they'll be done before class on Monday. Excuse me. Last thing, for Spanish-speaking students, we will offer across all of our biology classes. We've got 6 different biology classes this semester and 2 other teachers. We're going to get all of our students together who need a little bit more help, and there will be a special tutoring session for our Spanish-speaking students, and it will be led by other Spanish-speaking students. So these will be students who have taken biology and done quite well in biology in the past, and they will be able to translate terms as needed. So if that interests any of you, you are more than welcome to attend. I will follow up with more details in the coming days. All right, so again, this is just going to be a quick introduction of Unit 2. I really don't even want to call it Day 1, and I obviously have not uploaded the Unit 2 module yet, so there's nothing for you guys to do in terms of a warm-up or an asynchronous assignment. But I want to, like I said, clear up some time on our schedule so that we can use Monday to do conferences. So that means that we need to go over some parts of this first lesson today. So what we'll do is we'll describe the structure and function of eukaryotic organelles, and we will try to answer this question: why is it important that each organelle has its own unique function? That's a good question, and it's one that we'll continue to come back to throughout the course. Cells do a really, really good job of specializing, and that's ultimately what the answer to that question is. Cells want to have certain areas that are dedicated to certain jobs. Great question, Lisa. Yes, you should try to take notes, but at the same time, I'm going to move quickly to give you all as much time as possible to do your missing assignments, if you have any, as well as for those 3 people to take their exam. So, just try to capture as much as possible. We will come back to this and take a look at it in greater detail. So, what is a cell? Well, a cell is obviously a hugely important part of biology. Any biology class that you'll take will take a look at cells in some way, because cells are the smallest unit of life. They are the smallest living things. We've talked about this before, but there are so many different fields even within biology. Cellular biology is probably one of the most well-studied. And even then, you can break it down. There are specific researchers who focus only on one type of organelle, or they focus only on one cellular process. The primary purpose of any cell, however, is to create proteins. And so we refer to cells as protein factories sometimes. As I mentioned, there are many thousands of types of proteins, hundreds of thousands of types of proteins. So any given cell is really only going to focus on creating a very small subset of proteins. The proteins that are made by the cells that allow you to smell things, your olfactory senses, those cells are producing different proteins than the cells that are in your cerebellum, which allow you to breathe even when you're not thinking about it. And those cells are different than the cells that are in your intestines, which allow you to break down lipids. So every cell produces slightly different proteins. In some cases, they do produce some of the same, even though they might have different jobs. For example, most cells need to have a protein embedded in their membrane to allow certain things in and other things out. So almost all cells will produce those. But there are other cells that are really, really specific that are only produced by one specific type of cell. There are other proteins. I keep saying cell when I mean protein. For a long time, and this is going to be a really brief aside, I'm going to try not to bloviate. I'm going to try not to talk too much right now, as we know I have a habit of doing. But for a long time, human beings had no way of knowing what cells were. We didn't understand how life came to be. We didn't understand how new life was created. We didn't really understand how germs were passed on. And so it created all these, what we now consider weird and maybe even backwards practices. For example, people used to, especially more wealthy people, they would go in maybe every month or so and have a doctor take some blood out of them. They would either use leeches, or they might even just, give a small slit in the skin to allow some blood to drain out. And they thought that that's how you maintain health. They thought if you leave your blood in your body for too long, it starts to carry too much, essentially, dirt. And that's how people get sick. Of course, we know that that's not at all the case now. We know that there are bacteria, which are actually living organisms themselves that carry and that can cause disease. We know that there are viruses, which really aren't living, but are similar to living organisms in the fact that they carry DNA. And so those viruses can cause disease as well. But we had no way of knowing because we didn't even have basic microscopes yet. So we certainly didn't have microscopes powerful enough to analyze things on a cellular level. So it wasn't until really the late 18th and early 19th century when thoughts started to arise that there might be smaller units, and we wouldn't have considered them alive, but smaller units that were responsible for different processes in human beings. And so cell theory started to develop over the course of the 19th century. And of course, with the advent of the microscope, it made things a lot easier to understand. We could now see them actually taking place. And of course, those early microscopes were in really no way similar to current microscopes. We now, for the most part, will use electron microscopes that allow us to visualize things even on an atomic level. But in the beginning, we had the ability to use a series of light refractions and magnets, essentially, to visualize small things, things that were microscopic, but really, in the grand scheme of things, are still pretty big. So we came up with this theory, which essentially states that new life can only come from existing life. That's somewhat of a contradiction because, as we'll discover later on in the course, at some point, planet Earth was totally devoid of life. And it wasn't until a little over 3 billion years ago that life actually started to develop in the oceans. So the original life, of course, could not have come from life because there was no life for it to come from. But since then, life is really only coming from other forms of life. And we'll talk much more about that. But that's the cell theory. We've seen a similar hierarchy structure here, but what we want to focus on is the fact that organelles are just a level below in this hierarchy. They're a level below cells. So if we combine several organelles and we can pack them together, and we can create a cell. A group of cells, of course, becomes a tissue. A group of tissues will become an organ. A group of organs is an organ system, and then we combine organ systems that function together and rely upon one another. We create an organism. Of course, there are some organisms that are more complicated than others. In some organisms, you can kind of exit out the last 4 layers of this hierarchy. There wouldn't be an organ system. There are no organs. There are no tissues. Some living organisms are literally just one cell. But of course, human beings are very, very complicated organisms, very complex organisms that involve a number of different organ systems. Your respiratory system, your digestive system, your nervous system, your circulatory system, your skeletal and muscular systems, your endocrine system, your immune system. All of these work together to allow you to live healthily. But it starts with these organelles. It really, really does start with these organelles, which then create a cell. An organelle by itself is not living. Okay, so I just want to be clear about that. We have the ability to isolate organelles. We can pull them out of cells, but they wouldn't be considered living by themselves. All right, I'm not going to watch that video right now. We'll come back to that. This isn't for you guys. Okay, do you guys remember any organelles from previous science classes? Any parts of the cell?
Nucleus.
Yeah, the nucleus is this big blue thing right here. Anything else?
The mitochondria.
Excellent. Thank you, Janelle. We see the mitochondria. There are 2 mitochondria in this cell, these yellow things with the blue inside. Anything else?
Didn't plant cells have something like chloroplast?
Good. Plant cells specifically have chloroplast. Thank you, Josue. And I see Janelle also said in the chat a cell membrane, which is the orange layer on the outside here. Anything else we can remember?
The cytoplasm.
The cytoplasm. I couldn't tell who said that. It was either Carolyn or Janelle. What did you say, Josue?
Ribosomes.
Ribosomes, yeah. Ribosomes look like these tiny black dots that are kind of strewn throughout the cell. Anything else?
Nucleolus.
The nucleolus. Wow, that's good. So the smaller blue thing at the center of the nucleus is called the nucleolus. Good. Lance, did you have something?
Mitochondria? Question mark?
We got that one already. Yeah, that is probably one of the most important. Thank you for reiterating it. Okay, so there are a lot of different organelles, some of which we do not cover in this class because their function is a little bit more complicated. Their role in the cell is more complicated. But we will talk about several, and it is good for you guys to already have this knowledge. That's excellent. And I'm sure you remember it from probably your middle school science classes, so that's really impressive. Okay, so the cell wall is one of those other organelles. Josue mentioned that only plant cells have chloroplasts. Cell walls can also only be found in plant cells as well as some bacteria. A cell wall is the rigid outermost layer, meaning the most external layer, that supports and protects certain cells, meaning plant cells and some bacteria. The cell wall is made of cellulose. So what do you guys know about cellulose? Can anyone tell me anything about that compound?
It's a sugar.
Excellent. Thank you, Carolyn. It is indeed a sugar. And how did you know that?
Because it ends in OSE.
Beautiful. Yeah, it ends in OSE. So compounds that end in OSE, we typically know that they are sugars. And so because it's a sugar, which of our 4 biomolecules is it?
Carbs.
Good, excellent. I couldn't, was that, I think that was Abigail. Thank you. So cellulose is a sugar and all sugars are carbohydrates, they're carbs. And so because it's a carb, this is the last question, what is its monomer? What is the monomer of cellulose?
Monosaccharides.
Excellent, thank you, Melissa. It is the monomer is called a monosaccharide, otherwise known as glucose. So if we look at the structure of cellulose here, this is not the best picture. Actually, this is going to be kind of cool for you guys to see. Give me a second. Hopefully this works. Cool. So we can see glucose or monosaccharide is just one of these 6 carbon sugars. They look like hexagons here. But when we add them, we start to chain them and link them together, what we're creating is a polymer. In this case, we're creating cellulose. Linking them together makes them stronger and stronger and stronger. And so eventually you'll create fibers out of them, which are really, really rigid and which are quite durable. And this is why plant cells use them as their cell wall. If you're interested in chemistry specifically, or if you plan on going into medicine or nursing or doing scientific research, more than likely you will end up taking an organic chemistry class. That sounds a little scary, and it is a little scary. That was probably the hardest class that I took in college. But organic chemistry is really the study of carbon, essentially. And so all compounds which are considered organic have carbon in them. In this case, there's so much carbon in this structure here that they don't even write the letter for carbon, which is C. But everywhere there's a little bend or a little corner, that's where we would find a carbon. So in each of these, and here's a carbon right here, actually. So they do have the C written in a few places. But in all of these corners, there is a carbon atom. And the carbon atom is really, really unique because of some chemical properties that we won't talk about. You do talk about them in your chemistry class. But there's an entire field of chemistry dedicated solely to that one element and how that one element binds with other things and creates these really, really unique structures. So look forward to that. It involves some pretty serious memorization. Okay. And then there's the cell membrane, very different than the cell wall. Their only similarity really is that they are both kind of the outer layers. All cells have a cell membrane. Doesn't matter if it's an animal cell, a plant cell, a bacterial cell, a fungi cell, a fungal cell. All cells have a cell membrane. And the cell membrane, I like to compare it to kind of like our skin, how our skin is our outer layer. It protects us. It prevents certain things from entering our bodies that shouldn't be there. And it also our skin allows for sweat to come out. And sometimes when you sweat, it carries with it some toxins and other chemicals that don't need to be in your body. So cell membrane works the same way. It's the outer layer that allows some things in and prevents some things from coming in. And it also allows some things to go out and prevents some things from going out. It would be bad if, you were just standing one day and your liver just kind of fell out of your midsection. So we need skin and we need other tissues to protect our bodies from just anything flowing in and out as they please. All right, now we'll talk more about this, but the cell membrane is made out of a phospholipid bilayer. That sounds complicated, but a phospholipid really combines two things: a phosphorus atom or a phosphate group and a lipid. So these orange balls are the phosphate heads of the phospholipid, and then you can see these V-shaped structures. I'm not sure why they're shaped like V's in this image, but those are the tails that we've talked about, the lipid tails. All right, so a phospholipid has a phosphate head and lipid tails, and it's called a bilayer because we've got two layers of them. Here's one layer, here's another layer, and they face each other. There's a good reason for that we'll talk about later. So this phospholipid bilayer is made up of two layers that are facing each other. The tails face each other, and the heads are facing outward. The cool thing about the plasma membrane, there are several cool things about the plasma membrane, but one of them is that it is a mosaic. And what we mean by that is that it has a lot of different things embedded inside of it. So you can see there's a protein channel embedded inside of it. This is kind of like a tunnel in the middle of the membrane. Here's another protein that's embedded even more deeply. It's bigger in the membrane. Here's another protein, and this protein has a carbohydrate sticking out of it. And this basically serves as an antenna to signal to other cells what's going on. All right, so this membrane, it has so much embedded in it that we consider it a mosaic. Okay, skipping this. Here's the nucleus. You all knew what the nucleus was. And Janelle said ER too. I think maybe you were referring to the endoplasmic reticulum, which we can see here. That's impressive as well. We don't talk about the endoplasmic reticulum in this class, but it does serve a really important function in the cell. The nucleus is almost certainly the most important organelle. The nucleus is the boss of the cell. It's the control center. It's the location of the DNA in specific types of cells. We'll talk about this next week, but cells can be classified in different ways based on their different qualities. Eukaryotic cells are cells that have a nucleus. Most cells are eukaryotic. Bacteria are not eukaryotic. Bacteria are what we would consider prokaryotic because they developed before the development of the nucleus. So at one point, life on Earth had developed, but there were no nuclei in any cells. We consider those the oldest cells. They are very reminiscent today to today's bacteria, and that's why we consider them, or we call them prokaryotic. Pro is a prefix that means before. So in this case, this root right here, karyo, it's from the Greek word for nut. It's referring to the nucleus. So a eukaryotic cell, U means good, typically. Like, you know, you guys maybe have heard of the show Euphoria. Euphoria is when you're in a good, happy state. Or you may have heard of a euphemism. That's when you refer to something that's actually bad, but you use good terms to describe it. So that this prefix EU typically means good. In this case, it means true. So true nut, that means it actually has a nucleus. Prokaryotic is before the nut, before the nucleus developed. We'll talk more about that next week. But this nucleus controls all of the cell's activity because it houses the DNA. Keep in mind, every cell in your body has your entire genome in it, all 6 billion base pairs. It has the entire thing. It doesn't use the entire thing, but it does have the entire thing. Talk about that later. Someone mentioned ribosomes. It may have been Janelle. Sorry if it was not, or Carolyn, someone, I can't remember who. But ribosomes are also really, really important, and they work hand in hand with the nucleus. The nucleus has the DNA, and remember, the DNA is the instruction manual to make proteins. The ribosomes are the organelle that is actually responsible, or that are actually responsible for making the proteins. So the nucleus has DNA, which has the instructions. The ribosomes are like the carpenters to actually make the protein, the chef that actually makes the meal. They synthesize proteins. Ribosomes are really, really small, and every living cell has plenty of ribosomes. Here's an image right here that was taken with an electron microscope. Ribosomes are extremely small, and so you can't see them in most normal microscopes, what we call light microscopes. So some of you who've taken cosmetology classes, or if you've taken other science classes at West Meck, then maybe you've looked through a light microscope. We have several of them in the school. Electron microscopes are gigantic, and they cost many thousands of dollars, and they're really difficult to operate. So can't get those in the school, but they give you the opportunity to look at things that are extremely small. All right, mitochondria, also important. Mitochondria, we like to say the mighty mitochondria because they are the powerhouse of the cell. They provide all of the cell's energy. They take food in the form of glucose and they convert it into usable energy. Also important on this slide, and again, we'll talk more about this, we keep coming back to this central theme of shape determining function. A mitochondria needs to have as much surface area as possible. Smooth ER have ribosomes. You flipped it, Janelle. So smooth ER does not have ribosomes, and rough does. But again, we don't really talk about ER in this class, so it's good that you know that, and you should definitely take AP biology. Okay, but mitochondria, in order to convert glucose into energy, they need to have as much surface area as possible. Now, keep in mind, imagine that you have a, this is always so difficult for me to describe virtually. This is like the fourth time I've tried to describe this virtually. In person, I can actually just show you what I'm talking about. Okay, actually, here's what I can do. Bear with me for a second. Okay, so let's say I have a mitochondria, and that mitochondria has no folds in it. It's just a circle. All it has is its outer, or it only has one layer, no folds within this mitochondria. That means that the surface area of this mitochondria is going to be the circumference of this circle. So let's just say that the circumference of this circle, if I were to take this, where's my stylus? If I were to take this, remember the circumference of a circle is the size of its outer ring. So if I were to take what I just drew and stretch it out like this, let's say that that would be, let's just call it 10 as an arbitrary number. But if I have, how do I do this again? It's been a while since I used the app. If I make a copy of this and I move it down, now I've got another mitochondria that has the exact same size, but this time we're going to incorporate some folds into it. And this is what I mean by folds. I'm going to fold it like this and just keep going back and forth and keep folding, keep folding, keep folding. And then I'm going to go like this and keep folding on this side, keep folding. And then I might even loop back around and fold on the inside, keep folding. And then I close it off. Now I've got, if I were to stretch that out and straighten it out, it's going to be much longer. It might even loop around again. So now let's just say that this is 5 times as long. It's 50. So we greatly increase the surface area by incorporating folds in the mitochondria. And the more surface area you have, the more energy which can be produced. So mitochondria need to incorporate as many folds as possible to produce as much energy as possible. Let me switch back over here. And you can see in this image of a mitochondrion, there are a lot of different folds here. You will see that happening throughout biology. Life is really good at taking a little bit and making it a lot. You know, doing as much as possible with as little as possible. It's very, very efficient. So you'll see this, the incorporation of folds in order to increase the surface area. For example, think about our small intestines. Our small intestines are quite long. Hopefully you all never get to see, unless you end up being some type of gastric surgeon. Hopefully you never have to see anybody's intestines. But if we were to actually take someone's intestines and stretch them out, let's see how long they would be. How long? So your small and large intestines together are 15 feet long. But because they're so tightly folded inside of your torso, we can fit them in that small space. All right, so think about the folds inside of mitochondria in the same way. We're taking something that's really long, folding it up, and putting it into a tighter space. Okay, then we've talked about chloroplasts as well. I think Josue mentioned this. Chloroplasts are only found in plant cells. and other cells that do photosynthesis. So plants are not the only organisms on our planet that do photosynthesis. Algae also do photosynthesis, and a couple of other, fungal species will do photosynthesis as well. We call all of these organisms that do photosynthesis autotrophs. That means that they make their own food. You and I are heterotrophs because we go find different sources of food. Hetero means different. So we source our nutrients from the plants we eat and from the animals we eat and from the different liquids we drink. Plants don't have that opportunity. They can't get up and take a bite out of something else and then go back and replant themselves in the soil. So plants have to rely on their own ability to make food, to make their own food. Actually push onto these here. Celly? No. Okay. The process of photosynthesis uses light from the sun to create glucose, to make food. And then that food can then be used to make energy. So it's a cool process that takes place inside of plants. A vacuole. Vacuoles are organelles that store the extra materials in a cell. So cells are constantly taking things in and producing things. They need to have a way of storing them for future use, or if they can't get rid of them at the time. And this might be nutrients, water, waste, other things as well. Now, the vacuole in a plant cell is much larger than the vacuole in an animal cell. Does anybody have any idea why that is? Why would the plant cell have a larger vacuole? What does a plant need to store?
Creates its own food.
Yeah, well, that's a good point too. Yeah, plants make their own food, so they need to be able to store those nutrients. What else does it need to store? Yes, thank you, Dejan. That's 100% correct. Plants depend on water a lot more. We all need water, obviously. Every living thing requires water because of the process of cellular respiration. But plants need a lot of water, primarily because they don't get water every day. It's not guaranteed that it will rain every day. It's not guaranteed that they have access to an underground aquifer that provides water. So when they get water, they need to have a way of storing it. And in some extreme environments, water may only come, it might come very, very heavily for a month and then not again for the rest of the year. Or it might not come at all for the entirety of the year. So if it's a desert environment, plants like cacti rely on underground sources of water, or they rely on water from the air. They need to be able to, when water condenses on the cactus at nighttime, that's how it gets its water. But obviously that's not much. So these plants have evolved to be really, really good at storing water. And that requires that they have large vacuoles. We will also find out that the vacuole pumps water out as well. So some organisms that are aquatic, some bacteria that live only in water, also have larger vacuoles because they use it as a means of mobility. They pump water out and it propels them in a direction. Okay, the cytoplasm. The cytoplasm is the jelly-like fluid within the cell that everything else is swimming around in. The cytoplasm is pretty basic, but it's also very important because organelles need to have some way of moving around inside of the cell. Ribosomes need to be able to move around in order to deliver proteins to other organelles. The vacuole needs to be able to move around in order to pick up waste. There's another organelle that we don't really talk much about called a lysosome, which helps to break down materials like waste or pathogens. And it needs to be able to move around in order to do that. So there needs to be some way of these organelles moving to different places within the cell. But we also don't want them to move too much. We don't want them to collide with one another with too much velocity, because it could damage the cell. So this cytoplasm has a unique consistency, which is not too rigid, but also not too fluid. Okay. We'll talk about that later. All right, so for those of us who need to take the exam, the time is now. What you'll need to do is go into NC Cloud, navigate to SchoolNet, and I know, Nico, I know you at least started it. I don't think you finished it the last time I checked yesterday. So all you'll need to do is finish it. Hopefully you still have time on the clock to do it. There is a 60-minute limit. But for Anna and for, who was the other person? Sienna. Is Sienna still on the call? Yes. So for Sienna and Anna, I believe both of you need to start the test. So you'll go in through NC Cloud and you'll navigate to SchoolNet. Once you get into SchoolNet, there should be an option that says take a test. And the test code is on your screen, but I will also send it to the chat so you can copy it. It is BIOWMU1T, as in Biology West Met Unit 1 test. Everyone else, you should be working on your Unit 1 assignments to complete them. They are due at 11:59 p.m. this evening for full credit. There is a Unit 1 Day 8 exit ticket that you all can knock out as well. But for the most part, I want you to focus on those assignments that you may not have done from earlier in the week. And I will be here on mute. We've got 23 Okay, folks, so excuse me, it's 1:20. And I want you all to get ready for fourth block. You're one period away from starting your weekend. I know you all are looking forward to that. Again, we'll have grades updated this weekend, and we'll have time to talk with one another one-on-one to provide some mutual feedback. And I look forward to doing that. So have a great weekend, and I will talk to you all on Monday.
You too. Have a good weekend,
Thank you.
Mr. Rudd.
I appreciate it.
Have a good
See
weekend.
you guys. Peace out.